All right, so here we are. Hello, everyone. Thank you for your interest in the TNE Exploratory Grants 2026. I'm Marcela Gobo, Project Manager, Higher Education here at the British Council, and I'll be your host for today. And before we start, I'd like to introduce you to my colleagues, Vera Oliveira, Education Lead for the Americas, Anna O'Flynn, Senior Consultant, Gender Equality, Howard Beatty, Program Manager, Higher Education Systems and Internationalization, and Chika Meke, Cultural Engagement and Education Consultant, and my colleague, Romina Bettini, who will be supporting us throughout this call. This is the quick agenda for today's meeting. We have a few housekeeping rules just to make sure that we are on the same page and there are no disturbances. We are going to also share some insights on Brazil-UK collaborations in TNE. The grant itself, something about the gender statement that you will learn throughout the course, why it's here. It's something new in relation to the previous years for some. And we'll have the Q&A section for you to ask away and solve your doubts. And at the end, we are going to have a very brief survey just to learn from you and understand your expectations for the call and your perceptions for this event. So moving next, just before we get and dive into the content itself, I'd like to share a brief message around safeguarding. So safeguarding represents our commitment to creating a safe environment where no child or adult will experience harm, abuse, or exploitation during their contact with us, the British Council. We promote a zero tolerance in action approach to safeguarding, which means that all necessary efforts must be made to comply with the policy, irrespective of cost, implications, or operational inconvenience. So if you, by any chance, need to report any situation that puts your safety or the safety of others at risk, you can scan the QR code here on screen or contact me directly through the email address that's being posted on the chat. So I'd like now to invite my colleague Vera to share some information about collaborations between Brazil and the UK. Over to you, Vera.
Thank you so much, Marcela. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you all. For those who don't know me, I'm Vera Oliveira. I'm the education lead for the Americas at the British Council, based here in São Paulo, and with oversight for the higher education and science portfolio here in the region. And today it's a real pleasure to be here. I think that some of you, lots of you have engaged with us in the past in different ways with the British Council in Brazil. But I think it's always good to recap a little bit what we're doing, why we're doing, and what's the basis, what are the insights that are driving our work, and to make sure that we are bringing the most value to the UK higher education institutions and to the Brazilian universities we're engaging with. So our work in higher education in Brazil, it has many different areas. We do work to support student mobility, the perspective of providing information, training to agents and counselors. We work with the UK Alumni Network in Brazil, organizing a series of events, trainings for them to support them in their lifelong learning and careers. But when you're thinking about universities, how we are supporting universities directly, there are three key ways we are engaging with you. The first one is how we work with internationalization. Internationalization is an agenda, is a theme we've been working very consistently, at least since 2017. Back then, in preparation for CAP Sprint, we started working with the idea of how we can support capacity building in Brazilian universities, how we can support an exchange of knowledge between UK and Brazil in a way that would be sustainable long-term, that would promote a deeper understanding and exchange of best practices and so on. So their work internationalization, it started in 2017, but since then we've evolved, and nowadays when we're talking about internationalization, it's a broad term, but we're talking a lot about transnational education as well, as we understand that to be a deeper level of internationalization and a more challenged form of partnering. So we understand that's something we definitely need to support. Another thing that we're very focused that we also work in is research collaboration. So this is an area where we were implementers of the Newton Fund in the past. Nowadays, we have the International Science Partnerships Fund that we're implementing. It's a fund by the UK government. But apart from that big program, we also have our own support research collaborations. We open calls for it, and we also provide support to researchers, early career researchers with capacity building. And we will have some opportunities later this year for that as well. And last but not least, women in science. Some of you might know we have the Women Science Scholarships for the UK, but we also have the work with the gender equality framework that we developed for the Brazilian higher education institutions, which is about how we can make sure that the institutions are able to develop their own tools and their own monitoring for long-term change in terms of more equality and inclusion in their institutions. So those are the three broad works we do. And of course, we've been doing that through calls. So we've supported 47 projects between Brazil and the UK over the past few years. We engaged with a number of institutions and UK institutions, and we developed different calls done by the Brazil, but also done more broadly with global calls, such as this one that that's currently open. When you think about internationalization specifically and what we're supporting, we have these five key areas. We have the enabling research area. Sorry, next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So we have these five core areas: the enabling research, the internationalization of higher education. It's important to mention that we don't work with technical education in Brazil. This is something from our global work, but not something necessarily that we are working here in the country. We work to strengthen systems and institutions, and of course, as I mentioned, increasing equality, diversity, inclusion, support the learner. All of this work is not necessarily done directly, but we understand that the best way to achieve these results is to providing the tools for a strong long-term commitment between UK and Brazil. And when you think about that, and thinking about, as I mentioned, the role of transnational education, as you see in the next slide, the UK transnational education is something that we as British Council have been talking a lot over the past few years. It's something that the UK is one of the key countries nowadays focusing on this agenda of working internationally. And right now, the UK is working in 228 countries with transnational education, with delivering degrees abroad or partnering with institutions for dual degrees, online degrees, online collaboration platforms. So there are different ways where the UK is doing that. But it's very broad, the kind of presence of TNE. And we see that as an increasing trend. We have over 500,000 students nowadays studying TNE in the UK with the UK institutions. And what we see is that the TNE has a role in terms of more inclusion into the system. For instance, we all know the importance of studying abroad, how this brings a richness not only of knowledge, but of experience, of further development for the people. But we also know that mobility is very expensive for all countries. So transnational education became a stronger kind of tool for us to have the advantages of international education, but at the same time making it more accessible. And a key role of that we see, especially with Brazil, is the role of partnerships. So it's UK institutions partnering with Brazilian institutions to deliver TNE. When you think about globally, we see that distance education is has 30% of the models of delivering TNE, followed by collaborative provision, which is the partnering of higher education institutions to deliver those. And when you think about that in terms of Brazil, how is it showing? We see that in Brazil, it's still relatively small. We do have a small share of that. We have around 750 Brazilian students we studied who got into TNE with the UK in 21-22 when did this research. But we can see that TNE is still a very initial thing when compared to mobility, for instance. As you see in the next slide, we have we had during the South-South peak of student mobility. Of course, there were years where we had a number of students. We calculate that overall we got around 11,000 students, with some years when you consider a few period of time with 5,000, over 5,000 students. So mobility is something that's always going to be the biggest number, but we understand TNE as the way forward in terms of how to make sure that the collaboration between UK and Brazil is not only about a short-term mobility or exchange of academics, but something that's deeper, long-term. And in the next slide, you see that we also understand TNE as a key opportunity to also support in terms of progress in English language. We understand that the importance of having more inclusion globally in terms of publications that are beyond English, but at the same time, we all know that English is the key language for scientific publications nowadays. It still is. So the importance of having English language more spread out to support more collaborations, to support more publications, more visibility to the publications, scientific publications that are done in Brazil, and so on. And when you talk about what are the priorities for higher education institutions in Brazil, you see now in the next slide, please, that for the Brazilian institutions, what they are very interested in student exchange experience and research collaborations. And for Brazil, oftentimes they go side by side. We understand that sending students abroad is the first step into ensuring that they build their own networks, they get a deeper knowledge or more engaged with their areas of study, so that they come back, bring this knowledge, bring these networks, and start their career as researchers. So the role of mobility to support these research collaborations and to support a stronger research environment is very important. In the next slide, we have some of the numbers. The UK is the second biggest contributor for Brazil in terms of research publication, only after the USA. And we also have a very good number, which is that when Brazilians are collaborating with UK researchers, we see a bigger impact index in the publications. So that shows that it's not only about the volume of the collaboration of the publications, but also about the impact they bring, how much they're cited, and what this converts into the long term. And this is a very important aspect because we've been talking a lot about the importance of collaboration, the role of the UK, the importance of Brazil to the UK as well, because we know that for the UK, they look at Brazil and they understand the importance and are very keen to collaborate, especially in areas such as climate, energy, health, life sciences, a number of areas where they see the importance and they are keen to deepen the connection. But we also know this is not always a straightforward process and not always without challenge. Next slide, please. So here, when we did our research, we looked at what are the collaborations between UK and Brazil, where are the challenges, and what are the opportunities. So what we can see is that most of the collaboration that we see is for research, but we also see collaboration for scholarly work, for curricula, skills training. So as I mentioned, we funded many of these partnerships in UK and Brazil for capacity building in areas such as internationalization, early career research capacity building in terms of academic writing, but also areas such as inclusion. So we see that collaboration is something very strong. And the governance, of course, different collaboration types in terms of more stronger, longer term. But this collaboration, they don't come without challenges. So I think the first challenge is how this can be done in a strategic long-term way. So the planning and development, it's a very important challenge because oftentimes there is either a challenge in terms of getting the full support from the leadership of the university or getting the support from the academic community as a whole. So how this can be balanced out during planning, how this could be a more inclusive process to ensure that this is done in a way that people feel that it's important to participate and keep the partnership long term. There are systemic challenges, and we understand that in terms of both country context for both Brazil and the UK. We all know that currently we are facing a global situation that's more challenging for international collaboration in higher education, for student mobility. And we understand that funding has also become a little more difficult for both our countries, and also the security of funding. So how we can secure long-term funding, it has become more challenging. So this also is something that we have to consider when we're developing partnerships. And sometimes challenging values, for instance, not only values, but what each partner is looking for. So sometimes the UK university will be very focused in getting mobility or getting some numbers for TNE. Brazilian will be in one thing they want to explore. So how we can balance out different interests to make sure that it's a mutually beneficial relationship and long term. And the facilitators for this, like I mentioned, the funding is a key aspect, how we can make sure that we have a secure source of funding. Of course, we had very good news nowadays with CAPES Global, so many Brazilian universities now will have secured this funding that will help them in international partnerships. For the UK institutions, they've also been talking about mechanisms to ensure that they are able to prioritize partners and make sure this is long-term sustainable. The communication, so to ensure that not only the people leading the projects are communicating, but how this can become something that's institutional, because we know that sometimes when people leave a university, the collaboration goes with the person. So how we can make sure that you have this at the institutional level, but also more spread out so that when people leave, the collaboration doesn't finish. The equity, so the importance of actually having a mutual beneficial relationship, something that both countries, both organizations are learning from each other, not a feeling of one teaching the other, but actually exchanging knowledge, which is super important. And the incentives you can give to professors, to researchers, so that they feel the need to be engaged. And we can see that the impact of collaboration is very important in terms of, as I mentioned, the research citations, the research impact, but also the development and the implementation of frameworks and so on. So these are some of the things that we saw. And in terms of recommendations, and the next slide, you'll see some of the key recommendations we have and for how to enhance this partnership. So the first one, of course, is always about communication. You have to facilitate an inclusive environment for communication. And that goes with also addressing that there are barriers, there are language barriers, there are cultural barriers. So understanding that there will be barriers and how we can create environments that are safe, that are inclusive, it's very important. Review grant structures. So we know that oftentimes when we are evaluating proposals, the UK and the Brazilian institutions, they have different ways to account for their costs. So developing this understanding from the beginning is very important. So for instance, the UK institution will consider in their cost structure the time for the team that's involved, the professors, the researchers. In Brazil, not necessarily because of the way this is accounted for each institution, but this creates a difference in how things are being accounted. So understanding that there are these kind of differences and coming to an agreement beforehand is very important. Considering this when you are developing a proposal so that the funding structure is sustainable for the duration of the project, and that there are also plans for next steps during the development of the partnerships. I can say from experience that it's very common to have projects that are funded and that have an underspend. And I think all funders will tell you that this is uh, something that we don't love. We hope that all the grants spent. So we are always asking people to try and think about solutions for the underspend, things that they can do inside the project to maximize its impact, choose the grant that was located within the parameters. So I think having this understanding of what the grant's going to be used for, the structure also helps to problem solve that and have scenarios where we are not, losing funds in terms of the partnerships. Promote equity and balancing the relationship, so which goes with this communication. Ensure that it's something sustainable. So it's not about one partnership, one time only, but also about a bigger commitment. And in terms of what are the teams, what are the UK Brazil research collaboration what's it about? You see in the next slide that many of the partnerships, at least the ones that we were able to look at in the survey, they were about gender equality and human rights. We see that not only from the calls we funded, but also from Teams Brazil. This is something that both Brazil and the UK are very strong, and we see that as something that especially Brazil is very interested in, and the UK has been collaborating. Health and natural sciences as well, something that's very interesting for Brazil and for the UK. Science as a whole. So science is an area where we see lots of partnerships, sustainability, especially over the past few years. We've seen more calls that were addressing climate, sustainability, renewable energy, and so forth. And of course, English and TNE coming later as some of the other categories. In terms of collaboration types, in the next slide, you'll see that, as I mentioned, a lot of this is about research, followed by scholarly work and teaching. So these are some of the categories, and skills training as well. So this have been some of the key ones. And when you talk about outputs in the next slide, what we see as the key outputs from this collaboration, of course, the research publication is a key thing that we see, is a key thing that both countries look at and measure as a key output. The attendance of conference events, which is super important as well, as something that not only highlights, brings visibility to the work that was developed, but further supports the networking that will lead to more funding opportunities, more collaborative work. And the working groups, so the development of this, of these researcher networks, institutions, that leads to further collaboration. And in terms of funding type, who is funding this? How is it working? Normally, we see that there's dual funding. And for instance, in the calls that British Council funds, we always see a small measure of match fund from the institutions themselves. That's something that we always favor. So, for instance, in calls in the past, we saw that we were putting the funds, but the Brazilian institutions, they were match funding kind with time or, with something else. The same for the UK. In other calls, like International Science Partners Fund, it's funded UK and Brazil in a match fund scheme, which is very important as well because this brings more equality into the partnership. We also see sometimes single country funding, for instance, like we mentioned, the calls that we funded as British Council, but always with a measure of collaboration and openness, and Brazil funding in a smaller amount. And in terms of impact of collaboration, what we see as long term, I'm going to go a bit quicker just because I'm aware that of time. We see that stronger relationships is a key impact and a key thing that we look at. But we also see that enhanced problem solving, cultural exchange, as some of the things that are mentioned. Those are very important, especially in the current context. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have now CAPES Global. And you see in the next slide that we've got the new funding for CAPES to the Brazilian institutions. It has as objective to promote the development of strategic research and graduate education activities. It's very important, very interesting because it supports it funds the building of Brazilian higher education institutions networks. So there is a lead institution, but a group of universities in the same project, and that's very important. It's something that's especially important in terms when you're talking about how we can make internationalization something that's more spread in the system, not only with key institutions. And it's expected to last for 5 years, which is also very important, a full cycle of funding, with 3 selected consortia, 3 selected projects that were approved. We have here the link we're going to share with you later for those approved, and it's starting now, which is super exciting. And now talking about today, my colleagues are going to go over the call and talk about what's eligible or not. But I think also it was very good, and Marcela got this information, which I think is great, about what are the teams, what we're doing, what are you, the people who register to attend this webinar, what you're looking at. And what we could see from what you reply to, you're interested in research networks, collaboration, transnational education, translation, international mobility, dual degrees that also goes under transnational education. And the areas of interest are science, health, sustainability, social sciences. So again, we can see that the interests of the people who are here today or who has their trust here today, they pretty much match to what we've been seeing over the past few years in terms of collaboration. That's very good for us to see because those are the kind of things we're funding. We know there's still scope for us to fund other things, but we are very keen to see our role in this call into funding this. And again, transnational education is it's a very broad thing inside the bigger thing of internationalization, and it includes law degree, it includes capacity building. So we're very excited to have you all here, and we hope to see many nice projects. And we hope to also hear your feedback about what worked, what didn't, so that we are also able to develop all the activities beyond the calls that can support you in your interest in Brazil. Thank you very much, and over to you, Marcela.
Thank you so much, Vera. As always, a very insightful presentation, and I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about the environment of UK-Brazil partnerships and collaborations in TNE. So now getting into the details of the grant itself. Excuse me. I've got in here a few details to share, but I think the first and foremost, it's important to share that this exploratory grant opportunity is something focused on institutional partnerships. So we eventually receive questions about scholarships, about direct mobility, about research. What is essential is it's institutional partnerships working towards the progress or the acceleration of internationalization and to raise the quality of education in a more inclusive way. So the main purpose of this call is for institutional partnerships to advance the quality and to widen access to UK higher education delivered outside the UK, hence the transnational education focus. Again, they are not grants for research projects, and this is always an important item to share here with you. What are the objectives then? There are three main objectives that the call contributes to, which is contributing to long-term and sustainable international change that promotes more inclusive access to high-quality education through TNE. And here, the idea of long-term and sustainable institutional change kind of connects with what Vera mentioned before. We sometimes see collaborations that tend to end after one round or after a specific colleague leaves the institution. But what we look here is for projects that have the potential for sustainability to actually make a systemic change in the system. The second objective is to contribute to a better understanding of the local context and facilitate regulatory and operational environment to best support TNE partnerships. Again, as Vera mentioned, there is the importance of us having a mutual exchange. Of course, one side will have a little bit more to contribute on one end and the other on the other, but it's important that it includes dialogue, it includes communication and the adaptation to context-specific elements. And lastly, we can support TNE initiatives that promote positive change in local education systems, considering the context and needs, and creating a more inclusive and accessible international education environment that contributes to the sustainable development goals. I would like to kindly ask you to keep your microphones closed and feel free to open your cameras if you want, but just so we can maintain the fluidity of the presentation. So these are overall the three objectives for the call, and the information I'm presenting here will mostly be the same you will see in the guidelines document, but this is just to actually reinforce what we have and clarify potential questions you may have. The expected outcomes in broad terms are four. Strengthening higher education systems, and how is that? Again, it's very broad, so there are many manners of establishing TNE partnerships. It can be the dual degrees, it can be the capacity building, it can be through collaborative research. But again, this is not a research call. So you have to take a look at this again. So strengthening higher education systems is one of them. Supporting institutional capacity is another. Contributing to learner level benefits, so that element of exchange between the two institutions for the benefit of the students, and promoting equitable and mutually beneficial internationalization, which, as I see it, is cross-cutting across all of these. Now, what are the grants in itself? We are looking for high-quality projects, of course, and for Brazil-UK partnerships, we have 2 grants available. These grants will have funding of up to £25,000 each, and the selected projects are expected to start in January 2027 with a duration of 17 months. What we expect in terms of the partnership and the structure, it's an equitable distribution of both resources, responsibilities, and the benefits that the project will bring. And we truly and strongly encourage match funding between the institutions that are participating as to increase the potential of the impact from these grants. One important element to consider beyond the whole process of the application is that we have EDI and gender statements. I'm going to talk to you about this in a couple of slides, but make that a mental note because EDI and gender statement are essential. Now, in terms of the eligibility, what each partnership needs to have at least one lead UK institution and one Brazil institution. There can be more, of course, but minimally one from each side. And now, who are the ones that are eligible to participate? From the UK end, you must be a higher education provider with degree awarding powers. And from the Brazil side, you must be a not-for-profit higher education institution, either public or private, and or a not-for-profit research institute. In terms of ineligible institutions, for Brazil, TVET and further education are not eligible, nor are for-profit non-education organizations. Now, leading to the application process, for those of you that have been with us for a bit longer and have participated in last year's round, the application process is again taken through the Good Grants platform. So what is important to mention here and essential to keep in mind? The application must be started by the UK lead partner. It has to be done through the Going Global Partnerships platform, the Good Grants platform. You can see a picture of the landing page here on screen. All participants are expected to register, and then once you log in, you will be able to jointly develop your application. So again, the UK institution starts the process. UK and Brazil partners can collaborate in the development of the application, and ideally, the submission is made by the UK lead. So this is important for you to plan yourselves to discuss how the collaboration is happening. Again, as the application deadline is drawing closer. So regarding the application process in a bit more detail, there are 3 pillars I'd like to talk to you about. The platform itself, so as I mentioned, all leading partners are expected to have access to it, so you need to register and log in to use it. You need to have a strong EDI and gender statement. So even though these are not the topics of the call, as it's TNE call, and strongly recommended that you give this a high amount of attention and build a sturdy statement for each of the themes. All questions within the platform are mandatory, and there are the 4 assessment criteria that I'll be presenting next. as well for you to consider and understand what and how you're being assessed once your application is sent through. Regarding budget information, again, it's important to mention that we expect an equitable split in terms of the funding. And it's important to mention that there are finance caps considering different categories of expenditure that are allowed within the project. So please refer to the guidelines to see exactly how it works. And lastly, there are key documents that you are expected to present. So all required items must be presented in the adequate format. So again, check the sample application form so you can have an idea of what is expected, how you are expected to submit it, and also notice that there is a checklist that you are going to be completing as you go. In terms of the assessment criteria, as I said, there are 4. So we have project quality and relevance, which accounts for 35% of your overall mark, so to speak. Methodology and design with 30%, resources, which is the resource split and how it's going to be used for 10%, and the sustainability of the partnership with 25%. So once more, other elements to consider: impact on the environment. Even though it's not peer-reviewed, it's important for us to see how you're planning on dealing with the impact on the environment, the gender equality statement, and the EDI statement. Before we move on to the gender statement part, for sure, these are just a few reminders in terms of the deadlines. So we are currently on the 16th of June. The deadline for application submission is the 6th of July at 11:59 a.m. British summertime. Okay, so the results are expected to be announced by the end of November, and the subsequent stages come in December onwards. All right, so I hope I was able to clarify a couple of questions you might have, and if that's not the case, feel free to post them on the chat and we'll address these in the Q&A session. So now, handing over to my colleague Anna O'Flynn, who's going to present to you some tips for the gender statement elaboration. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks, Marcella, and thank you for already emphasising the importance of completing the gender statement. So we just want to remind you what we mean by gender equality statement. Am I on the right slide there? That looks different to the slides I have. Here we go, sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to start before we go into what a gender statement looks like by going through what we mean when we talk about gender and gender equality. So as many of you know, terms around gender equality are contested. They vary across cultural contexts, but these are some of the globally agreed terms that we use. They will sound familiar to you. So when we talk about gender, this is very much about the roles, behaviours, activities, attributes, attitudes that a given society, at a given time, considers appropriate for people of each gender. So they're very much socially constructed. They're not something we're born with, but they're something that society creates, reiterates, and are continually reiterated through different phases of our lives. When we talk about gender equality, we are then referring to, we understand that to be a state of being equal in status, rights and opportunities, and of being valued equally regardless of gender. So we're not saying that everybody is the same, that men, women, people of other genders are exactly the same. That all individuals should have access to the same opportunities and rights. Then when we talk about gender specific, particularly when we talk about research, this is where we're focusing specifically on gender. So a project, a piece of research that is focusing particularly on that, an outcome you might design, and we would talk about that being gender specific. And then the next definition is really, really crucial here, because as Marcel has already said, these projects aren't, they may be, you know, they really think about how you can make them gender sensitive. So by that, we want you to think about how you can mainstream integrate, embed gender equality through your program or project. So not perpetuating, for example, damaging gender dynamics, and at the very least that you are aware of that dynamic and what you can do to ensure that the gender relationships in the context of your particular project are not made any worse. But really, we want you to be thinking about the practical needs, what you can do on a practical level. Quality into your project. Examples about that in a moment. And then you'll see finally there, gender responsive. When we talk about that, we are referring to the outcomes that reflect an understanding of those gender roles and inequalities, which aim to encourage equal participation and equal and fair distribution of benefits. So some definitions to reflect upon there. So, as we've already said, here we're reiterating here in your gender equality statement, it's about demonstrating how the project will contribute to gender equality, and that again is the state of being equal in status, rights, and opportunities. These gender statements are intended to capture how meaningful yet proportionate considerations on gender equality can be addressed through a programme. So think about what's realistic in the work that you're doing. We would expect a gender equality statement to provide sufficient answers to the outlined criteria that you are required to address. Through that, you'll be able to acknowledge where there's potential for direct or indirect people of different genders, and how the project will contribute to reducing inequality through from the design phase through to the implementation and delivery and impact be funded. You can see here that we've also highlighted the UK International Strategic Framework on women and girls. It's a new framework from the UK government, which sets a target that at least 90% of bilateral official development assistance from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office will focus on gender equality by 2030. So as these are government funded projects, we need to ensure that we're starting to kind of consider that in all of the projects that we design and deliver and that we fund through this scheme. So getting onto the practicalities, what does a good gender statement look like? So next cycle, what we is that gender equality is embedded into your analysis. So just your context analysis, thinking about the problem you're trying to address, and that these will be built into then the subsequent action plans, so that the actions, the activities that you're designing are responding to any issues that you identify in those analyses. We'd also expect there to be a commitment to risk identification, as well as mitigation strategies as well. We'd want gender to be integrated into your programme approach with disaggregated results, so results disaggregated by gender, a strong focus on increased access to employment assets, labour force participation, persons of different genders, maybe some limited focus on addressing systemic barriers as well, and how crucially the project could help to empower people of different genders. We'd also want this to be built into our monitoring, evaluation and learning plan. So thinking about the data, but also thinking about, kind of some of that broader qualitative impact as well. We'd want to see it built into your approach, gender equality. So making sure you're using participatory approaches in planning and design with stakeholder engagement plan, accountability mechanisms. We'd also want to see it reflected in your team. So there's questions about the capacity of your team, the expertise on your team, and how you are making sure that your team is gender balanced, but also you have that expertise and understanding of gender equality in the team, as well as potentially some accompanying budget. Built into your methodology again, and that crucially, as we said before, that there won't be any negative, even if they're unintended, consequences on gender equality. And thinking about if there are potential negative impacts, how you're going to mitigate against those. So the questions, so this will be a good, there's plenty of detail in the application form, the guidance notes on how you can respond to the different questions, but these are the areas that you will need to think about. So analysis, as I've already said, think about what are the key gender equality issues that are relevant to your project and how it will contribute to addressing these. The measures, so what measures will be put in place to ensure equal and meaningful participation and opportunities for women, girls, minority genders. Think about the expected impact on people of different genders, both within the project and beyond the project. risks, we've said that many times, how you identify those and mitigate them against them, and then finally outcomes and outputs. So within your theory of change, within your monitoring, evaluation and learning plan, how will those relevant outcomes and outputs be measured in order to demonstrate that impact on gender equality, including disaggregated data? So I know we're short of time, so I'm just going to very quickly reflect on what kind of things you might want to consider there, because I don't know, you might not have done a gender analysis before, you might not have completed a gender statement, but here are the things you might want to look at. I'm not sure if can you see that in full? This is coming up now. Here you go. So gender equality statements, when you're looking at your context analysis, and these are the kind of things you might want to consider: your national policies, research, the proportion of men and women accessing higher education in your country, and think about other equality areas and the gender balance in the area of study perhaps. So subject segregation is an example. Moving on, when you look at measures, so thinking about what kind of activities to design to address some of these barriers. You might want to be thinking about system reform to remove barriers to women's participation in higher education, or opportunities to enhance women's leadership, and maybe even creation of curricula that embeds gender equality, so taking that more systemic approach as well. As well as thinking about continuous, is really important how you include those people meaningfully, how you bring their voice in to those conversations. When we look at impact, the kind of things we might want to look at are increasing women in leadership positions, enhanced awareness of good practices to address gender inequalities, increasing in gender equality research outcomes, and maybe thinking about skills development of students that are perhaps being discriminated against because of their gender. Risks, we might want to think about restrictive norms that limit access to opportunities for particular groups. Safeguarding risks, we've already touched on those, including around sexual and gender-based violence. And also thinking this is a huge one, a global issue really, those unpaid care responsibilities, which can often limit access to opportunities for women in particular. And then outcomes and outputs, thinking about things you want to measure in your project. You might want to think about changes such as improved skills, knowledge, awareness, attitudes. Think about outcome data, again, this disaggregation of data by sex or gender. The approach you're taking, so thinking about those who are impacted by gender inequalities. And yeah, we said about cross-referencing to section 2. So yeah, thinking about how you make sure this is weaved through your project design. I think that's it. Sorry, I've gone through it very quickly because I know time is limited, but I know there'll be time for questions and answers if anyone has any further questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anna. And so, as you could see, it's a very, very important element to consider, the gender equality statement. So please bear in mind that we brought this year because, especially last year, when we first started with the new structure for the calls, we had a handful of applications that did not make it through the following stage due to not so strong gender statement. So we're bringing this here so you can step up and provide us your very best. So we have reached the end of our presentation, and we now open the floor to your questions. If you have them, please feel free to share them through the chat box. And in the meantime, I'm going to present a few ones that came through the forms. So is there a specific requirement for applications from institutions outside the UK? Yes, as we stated, the institutions from Brazil must be not-for-profit higher education providers or research institutions, are either public or private. That includes, for instance, the federal institutes and the like. And both the UK and Brazilian institutions have to provide the required documents as mentioned in the call guidelines. So for instance, the supporting letter from the person with the delegated authority within your institution that kind of approves that the project goes ahead, the CVs from the project leads, and so on. So you will find all these details at the guidelines. Where can I see a list of partner UK universities and CAPS Global Edu networks? So for the UK, there isn't a specific directorate for all countries. So if you refer back to the guidelines, you will see that there are separate links for each of the 4 nations within the UK where you can check if the partner institution is listed. And as for CAPS Global Edu, you will see the very link listed here. You can see the 33 selected networks. There are a few questions coming in, so let me take the first one here from Leticia Domingues. Thank you for the presentation. My pleasure. Regarding the requirement that applications be submitted by higher education institutions, should the application be made by the university as a whole? For example, UFMG, Federal de Minas Gerais, or may be submitted by one of its department, postgraduate programs, or research groups. It can be done by the departments, yes. It does not have to be the whole institution. It would be lovely if it could, but it can be done through a specific department, yes. Howard, would you like to comment on this one?
Yes, thanks, Marcella. I did just pop a quick text in the chat there as well. So the vast majority of applications that we receive, they will be from, well, they can be like department heads or other sort of senior academics within the university. However, they must be recognised by their employers as being able to act on behalf of the university, which is part of the reason why we ask for supporting letters from the university management, just to make sure that we have that reassurance that whoever is creating and submitting the application does actually have, they are recognised as having the authority to act in that way by their employers. So yes, the vast majority of applications do come in from individual academics, but they are acting on behalf of their employing university.
Thank you very much for clarifying, Howard. So I hope that answers the question. We have another one here from Candace Glenday. How can we be matched with a UK institution? So Candace, if you do not have a UK partner at the moment, feel free to share your interests here in the box, in the chat box, perhaps your contact information, and we open the floor for other institutions to do so. If you're looking for another partner or one specific partner to start this partnership and project, you may feel free to share here specific areas of your interest. Okay, no other questions coming through at the time. So here there is a question about the restriction of scholarship and stipends related to this call. So I'll summarize the question here into this. So as I said back in the very beginning of my presentation, this is not a call for research projects. So it cannot be used, the grant funds cannot be used for research purposes. As long as the purpose of the call is maintained, which is to provide access to a wider number of Brazilian students to UK education, then that would be valid. However, we cannot fund one specific individual or a small set of individuals to pursue a doctorate degree. Let me see, we've got a couple other questions. Only Brazilian institutions approved in the CAPES Global Edu program can apply. That's a question from Tayana Alice Brito Almeida. No, not really. This is not an exclusive call for CAPES Global Edu networks. However, since this is a network opportunity that's already strengthened through the program, we encourage those Brazilian institutions to participate. But if you are not one of those, you still can participate. You can apply with your UK partner without any restrictions, as long, of course, as you fit the eligibility criteria. And a question from João. You underlined that this is not a research grant, so should we understand that you are looking for activities focused on transnational teaching and/or student mobility. Well, I'll ask Howard, please, to take on this and provide a few more insights on the possibilities we have for the programs and projects that can be developed.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Marcella. Yes, just to reiterate, the primary focus of these grants is to make UK higher education and qualifications available in countries outside of the UK. So, obviously, in the context of this call, that would mean in Brazil. So it's a chance for people because let's sort of agree on this. I think going to university is a very big step in any young person's life. They often face a lot of challenges in doing that within their own country, let alone if they were trying to go to another country overseas. So the purpose of the transnational education opportunities that we're trying to fund here is to make opportunities for people for young people in Brazil to access UK higher education and qualifications without the need necessarily to travel to the UK in order to take up those opportunities, because it's not just possible for everybody to do that. So that is what we're asking for here. So the idea about student mobility, it is an important thing, and we're not trying to say sort of say that we shouldn't support student mobility. But the point of this particular grant call is to make those opportunities without the need for students to travel. So that is the primary focus here. And rather than when it comes to things like scholarships and stipends and all the rest of it, again, this is because of the way that these grants are offered, which has much is coming from the UK government's official development assistance budget. There are certain sort of terms and conditions attached to that, and one of that is it's not really used to benefit individuals. This is why this is to do with institution to institution partnerships. So unfortunately, the offering of the use of these monies to offer stipends and scholarships, it's not possible. So unfortunately, that's the case. What you could do, however, is use the money to perhaps institute a new partnership, which is creating opportunities for a number of other Brazilian young people to have the access to be able to do perhaps a joint award PhD at some point in the near future. That is, if it was a case of establishing or building a new partnership with Attain, that is something that we could perhaps look at under this grant call.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Howard. Just to comment here, Candice Glenday shared their contact details. They're part of Universidade Estadual do Vale do Acaraú in Sobral, Ceará. And I also see that Aira Almeida represents the research group media and the public sphere at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. So they have interest in research collaboration, international academic partnerships, and the development of comparative study in fields of communication, deliberation, and a plethora of other ones. So please feel free to reach out to them if you are interested in assessing partnership opportunities. We have reached the end of our presentation, so I would just like to ask you to kindly take part in this very short poll we have. It's loading here for me, so bear with me for a second. Okay, so here you go. Just kindly share it with us. There are 4 questions to be answered, and we'll be very happy to hear from you. Once again, thank you, Vera. Thank you, Howard, Anna, Romina, for all the support throughout the process. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Marcella. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you and goodbye, everyone.
Bye, Howard.